Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I have Aparajita with me, who is a product manager at Microsoft, and I'm super excited to talk about what it takes to become a product manager, if you should even go down that path, and then also once you're in the role, how do you grow? So if you're interested, stay tuned. All right, so I'm going to introduce Aparajita Rana, who is a product manager at Microsoft. I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the channel.
Hi, Michael and channel viewers. I'm super excited to chat today. And exactly as Michael said, I'm a product manager at Microsoft. Been here 2 years, but I can also give a quick spiel on my background. I went to Stevens Institute of Technology, which is super tiny private tech school in North Jersey. Go Ducks! If anyone watching this happens to know Stevens. But I was a computer science major. I got a master's certification, but for the most part, undergrad was most of my education and
Mhm.
my experience, which I think will definitely expand on this kind of transition a bit further. But all of my internships and actual formal experience was software engineering. But then, kind of last minute, my first full time gig ended up being product management.
Mhm.
Definitely super content and happy with that choice. But again, I think that's often a decision a lot of new grads are facing, or if you're in early on this and you're thinking about an internship in PM and again, kind of considering the different options you have with that background, I think it's a unique path that is becoming more and more popular nowadays. So
Yeah.
let's talk a bit more about that too.
And on that point, apologies that you also make TikTok videos that are helping people figure out if it's the right path for them and how they can prepare for interviews and all these great things. So I do want to shout your channel on TikTok. I think it's over 11,000 followers there. But make sure to follow her there if you haven't. I think it's really helpful insights. So make sure I'll add that in the description as well.
Yay, yeah, definitely. Mostly TikTok right now, looking to expand, but yeah, definitely appreciate the support.
Awesome. We'll include all the other channels too. Make sure people explore it because you don't want to miss it. I check it every day on my feed because I'm always learning new things, even if I've been in the PM role for a few years now. So, other things I want to shout out about your background, there's some impressive things that you've done. You're an above and beyond computer science fellow at Facebook. I would love to just quickly hear what that means. And then I also know you interned as a software engineer at JP Morgan. Maybe that was your junior year internship. So tell us about those two opportunities and maybe how that formed your career.
Yeah, definitely. So both of those are definitely a highlight experiences. I can start out with those and then kind of some of the other things that allowed me to get into those positions.
Hmm.
But for the first one, Facebook ABCS, that was a newer program when I was in college, but it basically had you working with some software engineers at Facebook, which again eventually became Meta.
Hmm.
But you would run through leet code style problems in different situations that they kind of come up for you. It felt like a very gamified, like engineering practice. And
Hmm.
you get in these different groups of, again, software engineering students ongoing that would run through these different problems. And you'd again have this kind of leader that was a software engineer at Facebook that would walk you through these different problems,
Hmm.
tell you about their day to day.
Wow.
They'd also conduct like resume reviews. It was an awesome program.
Yeah.
I think it might be renamed, so I'll definitely send it to you if they still have that program and what it's called now.
Hmm.
But I thought it was a great way to both make a connection to someone that was working full time at Facebook. I don't think I ended up getting a specific referral from that individual, but I did end
Hmm.
up getting a referral, which again, connections
Wow.
were great. But on top of that, even the community of people that I worked with those other software engineering students, it was nice because it was outside of the bubble of my college.
Hmm.
And all of those people went on to also work at super cool companies, and I'm
Right.
obviously connected with them on things like LinkedIn. So getting
Nice.
to see what they're up to is definitely nice as well. I feel like that program, besides having a group and community to get through that traditional leak code grind with, was
Hmm.
also just great circle of people that ended up continuing to accomplish great things.
That's awesome.
And the application process was just like a couple questions, I think submitting your resume for background.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward. But
Wow.
again, definitely a great experience. And that was earlier on in college. That was the summer after my sophomore year.
Got it.
So
Okay. We're
yeah.
gonna make sure we look into that and recommend people to explore if it's still out there. Sounds like a great opportunity to network, get referrals, get your coding interview prep, down to a T. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And I think at the time it was also focused on like early in like college. So within
Mm,
your first 2 years. And I think that tends to be the hardest time to get that initial foot in the door because a lot of companies are looking for maybe the latter half. So again, another great program for people like in their first or second year specifically.
awesome.
Um, so yeah, that was a great time. This was all virtual. This was COVID, so I think that was
Oh,
also
wow.
maybe a part of the push. There was
Yeah.
all right. We're still sending this virtual stuff. Let's see some programs I could work with it as well.
That's awesome. And sometimes, there's programs that come and go, and you get lucky. Like if you were just there at the right time, the associate product marketing program I was part of at AWS, I think was there for maybe a couple of years, and then it was impacted with everything happening in the markets. So I was very fortunate, and so I think you sort of just keep looking because things like this could pop up. Initiatives are launched, every year, and so keep looking if this one is not available. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your software engineering role as an intern in JP Morgan.
Yes, awesome. So my first actual internship right before, I guess, even JP Morgan was at Bank of America. It
Yeah.
wasn't, I didn't have the formal title of like software engineer, but that was supposed to be a more technical facing role. I was lucky that that again happened actually the summer after my sophomore year. So I feel like I had internship experience to get me that software engineering internship at Chase the year after.
Hmm.
But again, JP Morgan was definitely my first more formal software engineering style role. I had a great time. I again things were still primarily virtual, but my manager was local to me, so we'd sometimes meet up at the office. We built out a program that
Hmm.
would basically do a form of like chaos engineering. So we'd put a bunch of different issues into a system, try to find like gaps, and then
Hmm.
we would try to eventually have it trained to like figure out what like error codes that it should handle in a
Mm.
very like deep level like financial software system.
Wow. Yeah.
I got to work with very, very cool engineers on that project. It's actually patent pending now, so I feel like that
Oh,
was
wow.
a cool thing to say. And even as an intern, they actually just reached out to me like maybe a month or two ago that like, hey, just so you know, like you did work on this project. Like if and when it gets approved, like you'll still be able to say that too,
Wow.
which is
That's
super
added
cool.
added to the resume of amazing things that you've done. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and again, I think seeing the fact that even as an intern you can have impact like that is awesome.
Yeah.
But again, I think that looking back at the same time, I think the reason I eventually also ended up switching to a tech company is that I do think at the root of it, at a financial institution, what they're looking to innovate upon
Hmm.
isn't necessarily like tech. They're looking to innovate upon like more related to like their financial services. So
Hmm.
again, if you're a
Hmm.
very finance heavy person, you're really into that. I think that's a great fit. Working as a software engineer at a financial company.
Yep.
I think where my like actual passion interest lied was a lot more of like tech products and that innovation, which again,
Yeah.
slowly foreshadowing into me leaving. But again, I did enter my junior year summer, and then I actually ended up continuing working part time through the fall until I ended up getting
Oh, awesome.
another offer, and then I had to renege, which was a whole other
Oh,
thing
man.
too.
That's another episode. We could go deep on that. How to manage those
Yeah.
situations.
No, yeah. But honestly, I again had a super, super supportive manager.
Hmm.
She was like a multi like big entrepreneur, was always doing something like fun on the side, and she was
Hmm.
actually the one that pushed me to explore a bit more about product management. So I
Awesome.
definitely credit her with a huge part of that. And even I was super upfront and like frank about getting different offers, and I was like, hey,
Hmm.
like genuinely, what do you think I could do? And I felt like she was someone I could ask for like completely honest advice from. So I
Right.
think finding people like that, huge win, and huge credit to them for guiding me as well.
That is awesome. I've heard similar stories of software engineer interns who become product managers because of a mentor, someone who sees that like, passion for product design and entrepreneurship, and they're like, you should really look into PM. And it sounds like similar story, and then become full-time PMs. So that's really cool to see. And I think, there's some very impressive things that you're working on at Microsoft relating to like the latest AI models, which we can jump into later on. But so I'm excited to really talk about that transition from software engineer to product manager because the topic that we want to focus on is should I become a product manager? So, what were the things that really motivated you to become PM? I'm sure that mentorship had some influence there, but thinking about the types of tasks that product managers were responsible for, anything that really stood out to you that motivated you to actually go into PM?
Great area that I think again you can see so much conflicting advice, but then also not maybe a super straightforward like answer to. And
Right.
that is PM to some extent.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think first step for me, or at least the way my path ended up being was first my mentor manager at the software engineering internship was like, hey, have you heard of PM? Like, kind of seems like you might have an interest or personality in this. Since even as a software engineer, like my favorite thing was like organizing our daily stand up, agile, trying to like find any new frameworks I had read about online, like trying to apply
Hmm.
them into our day to day. And she was like, I think this might interest you. So I had started out by just having some conversations with product managers at the company I had interned at.
Okay.
And that again was super helpful to just start to get an idea of like, okay, what does this mean? Like personality wise, do I think like this is someone that I aspire to be like? Is this what I see my day to day being? But I do think that only gets you so far because
Hmm.
PMs at different companies and what they end up doing can vary so heavily.
Right.
So again, get exposure, follow accounts like Michael's, like mine, like all these different influencers are out there that explain and try to get as detailed as possible about what their day to day looks like.
Hmm.
But again, I think that gets you to maybe step zero, where you're like, okay, this is something I'm actually fully interested in.
Hmm.
But I think from there on out, then it's about maybe getting a little more like nitty gritty. I like the old school, like read a couple books, like make sure you're trying to get a full
Hmm.
picture understanding a little formally.
Hmm.
I really like the classic like cracking the PM interview.
Hmm.
I know there's the coding version as well, but I think that's great for just general expertise. I like Inspired. That's another great book as well. But again, just to kind of set baseline expectations, now you're coming into any other conversation you have with a bit more context on what PM means.
Yeah.
And then I think the big question at this point that I had to ask myself was, especially when you go full time, I think a lot of people struggle to realize this or are a little intimidated by this, but they expect to go into a role fully understanding what the role is going to entail.
Hmm.
But the truth is, whatever space you go into, if you're the best dev in the world, if you're the best PM in the world, when you get introduced into a new job, a new product, a new place overall, a new team, there's always going to be things you don't know. And I think what I realized for myself, especially through that part-time work, especially when I was balancing it with school and all these other things, um, I realized that the struggles or the difficulties that come alongside being a software engineer weren't issues that I was as motivated to work past than
Hmm.
issues that a product manager might have.
Wow.
I think that was big, where it's like you're gonna have issues, you're gonna run into problems, but which one are you actually like motivated to like push forward in, or which one are you
Mm.
like actually, I'm good, like I'd rather do other things right now.
That's such a great framework to think about, which I've never thought about. I think I always say, where do your interests and day to day tasks lie? Like, what are you most passionate about? But like the reality is, like you're really going to solve problems, and it's like which problem, uh, which is probably they're probably equally stressful, equally like anxiety driven, and just like you have to deal with people and difficult concepts, and then like which of those two do you want to spend time solving and push through, which is a good way to think about.
Exactly, because to some extent, I love to code when everything works out perfectly. It's so satisfying, it's great, and that's definitely the rose-colored lens of everything. But I've seen you
Hmm.
say, there are going to be those positive, incredible, like, yes, I did it kind of moments. But a lot of it is also working through the issues that you might run into. And again,
Hmm.
I think different jobs obviously breed different skill sets and personalities and things like that. So it's also about that kind of long term vision of like, okay, is this something I'm also just genuinely interested in? And that's a hard one to fully understand without experience, especially
Right.
like I think you probably get a clear understanding of that after you start full time.
Right.
But a great thing about internships is like that's the time to test it out, like try out different things. Like
Mm,
classic advice is like learn what you don't like. That's actually an important thing to understand as well.
mhm, mhm.
But,
So So we touched on a few things. One is, talking to people at your current company, speaking with the current product managers in your area to understand what's their day to day, get like really good insight, some formal reading on top of that, and then ultimately deciding what's the real problem that you want to end up solving and push through. So when you're in those conversations with PMs, were there specific things that they said that really sparked your interest and made you want to actually go into PM?
ooh, that's a great question. I would say, I mean, for starters, this was maybe more of a tell of the company and specifically what they were working on. But I think it's very obvious when someone's actually passionate about what they do. Like if they
Mhm.
like seem to like light up and they're like, oh my gosh, like there's so many different things I could tell you. There's so much like
Yeah.
wisdom I want to bestow upon you. I think that's definitely a good tell. But that's probably more related to the company than maybe specifically PM.
Mhm.
I would say that everyone I high level, I feel like I just realized that a lot of the PMs that I chatted with, I felt like we had the same personalities. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
I could definitely see me in your being, you know, who you are in another like 10 years.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think, I mean, yeah, it was like the challenges that they would face. It was, oh my gosh, like engineering has all these requests, you know, business has all these requests. Your manager is getting all these things from like senior level leaders. Like, how do we
yeah,
balance all those things? And I was like, I love that. Like, those are, that is, I want to be that person in the middle, like balancing all these different opinions. Like, I
right.
love like the negotiation aspect. And I think that was a big clicking point because I was like, oh wait, I actually also already do this in so many forms in college. Like I was like in a bunch of leadership related roles, and I feel like that was a great, you know, milder example of doing things like that. I think
Mhm.
even just like as a person in a friend group, I was like, okay, I actually kind of play this role day to day, and I think it's something that feels really natural to me, and it's something that I want to actually keep getting better at. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
that's
that was
awesome. I like that idea around if you were involved in, like, leadership programs, for you, I know you did student government, at Stevens, so things like that where you're a leader, you're managing different teams and stakeholders, and that's something you enjoy, it's probably a good sign that you might be a good PM, and you should go for it. Um, so we touched on sort of what excited you about the role and things like that. So now that you've been in the role for 2 years and 3 months, and you've gone through promotion processes, like what is it like to be a product manager at Microsoft? And is it what you expected? Those sort of responsibilities that you were excited to take on? Have you seen that?
Yeah, no, great question. And yeah, two years, 3 months ish in, I feel like I've gotten to honestly experience a lot because my first year I had actually relocated out to Seattle, was working at headquarters, and I was on a
Mhm.
different team than I have been on for the past year.
Mhm.
And honestly, those two teams felt like completely different experiences.
Mhm.
My first team, my technical title is like TPM, and I feel like that first team I definitely felt more technical. There was, you know, a little coding involved. I would kind of use a bit more of that traditional comp sci degree, a bit
Oh,
more day to
okay.
day, just a little, just a hint. Um, but it was a very like internal tool. It was something that a lot of my coworkers were just using to exchange data between, you know, different teams and potentially even external partners. So the
Mhm.
platform had to be super secure. That was a lot of what I was building out is the framework to make sure that people internally can easily use this tool, but then also external partners, you know, no one's seeing each other's information, like what's the best platform to put these things on. Um,
Mhm.
but I think that that was a great experience. I think that as a new grad, a lot of leadership is looking at you and they want to see like, okay, what's this person about? Are they here to just kind of coast and like
Mhm.
have a good time? And there's nothing wrong in that either. But I do think a lot of leadership was like, oh, she seems a little sparky. She wants to be working on like more quote unquote exciting things.
Right.
In everything else I did, I tried to like really also put my best foot forward, be really clear, like, oh, this is something that interests me. Microsoft specifically, you know, has had PMs for a super long time, also gone through all these different name changes of like program, product, like TPM, like all kind of different
Right.
versions. But I think they actually have a really great setup of like we have amazing outlines for like our review periods. And on top of just reviews and basic feedback, it also makes you think really long term of like, okay, what do you want to be like? Are you still feeling challenged? Is it still interesting to you? So I think having those frameworks really set me up to get put on the team that I'm currently on, which is definitely much more like high pressure, high visibility, high like energy. But I think that's also why I've been able to see growth really quickly. Is that I feel like I am
Mm,
very like hit the ground running. Like I have this kind of young, not too many commitments kind of energy to me that I'm like I'm willing to put in the energy and work because I think it's super interesting stuff that we get to work on in the first place.
that's awesome. So you're 100%, locked in, as they say, on your role. So people notice that, right? The more you deliver, the more you're contributing, and then I think the most important thing that you called out is that you actually are very open about what your aspirations are, and you sort of make it known that you're interested in owning more and doing more, and people will think of you when those opportunities come up. Such a great tip. And so I think now that you're in the role, like what are the actual responsibilities? I know that it's different team to team, but in your current role as a product manager, what are you really responsible for owning?
Yeah, that's so again, I think even just coming to like Microsoft as a company as a whole, I do feel like our PMs own like this a slice of what makes up a huge product and like
Hmm.
hundreds of people that probably work pushing together one vision of a product. So my specific again role day to day tends to be a lot of interfacing with our feature team specific PMs and engineers. So they're the ones that are actually like putting the bugs into the feature. But
Hmm.
then also OEM engineers who are looking from a very like hardware low level kind of side of things of putting together these different images, making sure all the correct content's there, and kind of balancing the requests from both sides, and also being like, oh, these are our partners. We have to kind of help them out. But then Microsoft, we also have our own like business that we're trying to run. Like, how do we balance the requests from both sides?
Hmm.
The feature team's finding these issues. These are their priorities. OEMs have their own priorities. I think our team kind of lies in the middle of like, we want to make sure that our customer, like our user overall, is having the best experience. Like, how can we
Hmm.
take what both of these teams want and put them together into making like the best product possible?
Gotcha. That makes sense. And does this entail writing requirements or, setting up meetings to make sure like there's coordination across teams, strategy, doc writing, things like that? Are those the type of responsibilities you see?
Yeah, 100%. A lot of doc writing. I have recurring. I almost see it like as a stand up with OEMs. So like every Wednesday in the morning and the evening, we give an update of each of our features, what blockers are looking like, what's new, what builds they should be on, things like that. And in terms of documents, yeah, definitely things like PRDs. We specifically also with the people that we work with, we do a lot of things like pre-installation guidance, like writing scripts on how to
Mm,
install different things onto a device. I think a unique part of, especially when you write docs, is thinking about what kind of audiences are getting it. Where we interface with certain OEMs like day to day, so having really well written documents is super important because that might be the only time we actually get to interact with certain partners. And they're heavily relying on these documents being very digestible, potentially also across even like different language constraints. Where if English isn't their first
mhm.
language, how are you writing a document that they can actually like completely make sure that they're getting and are able to build a system that you are asking them to.
Yeah, I always say that writing is actually the best skill I ever learned.
Yeah.
And my 4 years at Columbia, we have the core curriculum, which required us to take humanities courses. And I was an econ major, so a lot of times I was just like, okay, I just got to do what I have to do to get through this. But uh, when I started working, I looked back and I was like, the courses that I actually learned the most and I'm actually using now are the writing, reading large amounts of text and then being able to also write effectively and communicate, story tell, all those skills. I think that's actually so important because my stats and econometrics classes are not really used right now. Like they're good things to have as being analytical and having that like appetite for numbers, but like yeah, like 80% of my role is writing and communicating in meetings or offline. So I can't just over emphasize that part enough of like being able to be a great writer. You don't need to write novels, but you just need to be able to communicate like succinctly, get to the point, make sure people can understand you so that you can more easily convince them to agree with you or see sort of like competing perspectives, right? I'm not sure. At least at Amazon, it was a big culture. Like, how much of a culture of writing is there at Microsoft, or is there more of a slides and presentation culture?
I would say, again, definitely one that I've seen be a bit team dependent. I think on my last team, I did a lot more of like specific doc writing and things like that. I think now, just because a lot of the content we end up sharing that changes a bit more frequently tends to be things we share in like slides or decks or have leadership present. I would say honestly that the writing is definitely a big priority. We actually have someone on my team who's like background, like he was a writer, so I'll always have
Wow,
him be like, hey, can you review this, like does this make sense? Always great feedback from him too.
that's
um,
awesome.
but yeah, I would definitely say it is a big part of the culture and priorities. It does end up being like to some extent preference of consumption of material. Like we'll have a doc and a slide, be like, all
Mhm.
right, you want more, if you want every detail written out, here it is. But then
Yeah.
also here's a TLDR version of it.
Awesome. And this is a question I get a lot is, we talk about PRDs, writing, collaboration. So people want to know, like, what are the skills I definitely need to have to become a product manager, right? So, like, I get that question of, do I need to be a great software engineer? Do I need to be um, great at doing like product design or analytics and like all these sort of responsibilities? So, like once you're actually in the role, what are like the skill sets that are actually most important to be a great PM?
I think two things definitely come to mind with that. The first one would be the ability to simplify super complex ideas.
Mm,
And I think that, especially with a technical background, was something I maybe struggled with just because when I do, again, have that technical like knowledge base, I'm almost like, oh wait, I want to see exactly how this was built out because I could probably understand that. That'll be how I'll learn. But I think getting comfortable with just like having more of a high level understanding, being able
mhm.
to deliver that with confidence. But of course, my old manager used to say this, but he was like, you need to know enough to be dangerous, where it's like
Yeah,
you can be able to answer questions, like think on your feet, have a good understanding of things, but you don't need to be the one down there like coding it out. Like you need to have a good knowledge base to again be able to answer questions and be able to write these different documents and deliver confidently on it. But you need to get comfortable with not being the one that's pushing every bug update and can assume that this was built out the way that it should be.
mm,
And then I think alongside that, the second one that I would say is asking good questions. That's maybe the stereotypical one, but especially when it does come to these complex ideas, getting comfortable being like, hey, this doesn't make sense, or can you explain this further? Like, I think you kind of have to let go of any ego side of it, especially again coming from that tech background. I'm like, oh my gosh, like software engineers gonna be so annoyed. Like I'm asking all these like quote unquote dumb questions.
right.
Never the case. I've seen people like that again are super senior at the company like ask like fundamental questions and be like, hey, just so we're on the same page. I'm sure half the time a lot of people are wondering the same thing. Here's baseline question. And of course ask questions that hopefully you're paying attention during meeting, aren't repeating too much. But
Right.
it makes everyone feel like you're actively listening. And then again, you'll be in a better place that the engineer doesn't have to keep interfacing with the other people that are asking questions. You'll be that middle ground point of point of reference. They can come to
Right.
you. You can answer the question the next time over. I think those two are probably the biggest skills I've seen
Oh man.
needed.
I've been like nodding my head the whole time you've been speaking because it's like every skill you mentioned is something I think about every day and deal with every day. Like this might have been the best list of skill sets that I've heard because like number one, the complex ideas into simple sentences and simple ideas like are so important because that's like what you do every day. You have to communicate with like super technical stakeholders and then like very non-technical customer facing stakeholders. Like how do you engage with both? Um, so you're a translator somewhere in the middle, having a high level understanding and knowing enough to be dangerous. I love that one because you don't have enough time to become super in the weeds, like you were saying, you have so many other responsibilities. So you just got to get there, understand it, and contribute, add value. Um, and it's hard. Like I actually struggle with this a lot because, you want to go into a meeting completely prepared, know everything, and then be able to go deep. But you can't really do that because you have PRDs and custom meetings and presentations. Maybe you can start spending your weekends going deep on it. So it becomes like a work-life balance challenge. So that's a great point. Like you have to be really good at managing that. And then I think your point, like you're saying, like it leads to asking good questions. Like the way you become really good at being dangerous with limited information is like you ask questions that are so well structured that they hit the right points. You find out exactly what you need to know. But the other part of that is like I've been in so many meetings where you go on for a while and then no one steps up to ask the basic question of like, why are we doing this? Like,
Right. Yeah.
did did a customer request this? Was there a bug? Like, what's the source of this problem? And sometimes, like, what is even the problem? Because a stakeholder might just jump into a solution, and then you're like, wait, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Like those kind of questions that you called out are so important. Basic questions, fundamental things to even start, the meeting and make sure everyone's on the same page. So, like, those are all things I think about every day. So I appreciate you like calling all of those out.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's definitely something easier to speak on, I think, after some
Right.
experience in the role, because there's definitely something I was like trying to look for and like search up and think about before starting my role, but I think you get adjusted to it, and again, you get to be around. I think another great thing about some of the companies that we work at is you have such great examples of awesome PMs in front of you, and there's so many different flavors of it.
Mm,
So seeing how they also, conduct themselves, how they ask questions, how they answer questions, things like that is a great starting point to be like, hey, is that a persona that I also kind of want to emulate? Is
mm.
that something I like or don't like or whatever? I think great examples in front of you to always be inspired by too.
I love that one too, man. There's so many on this. I'm really excited for people to check this episode out. And then I want to jump into, how you've actually been able to grow and get promoted twice. Is that right? In the first 2 years?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Unheard of, honestly. So I'm very curious, like, what has helped you do that? What is the secret?
Okay. I think the first thing that comes to mind is having the super kind of uncomfortable conversation of being really clear with your manager that you're ambitious and this is what you want. And I think actually before that is also being like, hey, is this something you want? Where I've seen with every promo, there is an increased level of, general responsibility, general like expectations. You're going to be requested to perform at a higher level. So being honest with yourself about that, I think is probably a good first starting point before, verbally committing to that and wanting that in front of a manager. Set
Hmm.
up specific time with your manager. This is my timeline. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? This is where my strengths are. This is what I want to work on. This is why I want to become a manager. This is why I want to become, a senior suite. This is why I want to become a PM2, whatever it might be. Being super clear on what, making sure your expectations are aligned. I know within our company, we have a pretty high level idea or list of what roles responsibilities look like as you get promoted. And look at that list. Be like, okay, this is what is expected of a senior SWE or PM. These are
Hmm.
the skills that I think I need to be working on. This is what I'm doing to work on them. If all goes to plan, and I'm honestly a big believer that if your manager is also not giving you feedback that is like showing that you're not meeting those things, there's no reason for you almost not to be promoted. If they're not almost doing their job
Right.
of like telling you what you're missing when you're being super clear on like this is what I think I'm doing,
Right.
this is what makes me, deserve to be pushed on to the next level. This, the math is all here. It should all add
It's
up
not.
to this
Math
promotion.
is not mathing.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, again, there is like a level of like budget, politics, whatever that
Right.
plays a role in that. But at the end of the day, what's in your control is being super upfront about what you want. And I do think like, again, some teams it's easier and harder than others based on things like budget and whatnot. But just knowing the expectation that if this is something you want, you're gonna have to also put in the work, especially
Mm.
someone early in career. Like you're gonna have to try a bit harder for sure.
Wow. Okay, this is really insightful. Like the first part, clear conversation with your manager and figuring out internally, do you really want to do this? I think for the most part, people can understand that, like what that takes, and sort of sit down and think about it and have an honest conversation. But you mentioned setting up time and dedicated time to talk about this with your manager. So do you recommend doing that outside of your weekly one-on-one with your manager? And if that's the case, is there a specific cadence that you think works well?
Yeah, so again, I think I've seen it both sides where I think my first team, my manager and I kind of always had a bit of time to do a bit of a career check-in,
Okay.
versus my current team, just with things just there always being new fires and new issues. Our one-on-ones
Right.
tend to be very like focused on the now, what we're working on.
Hmm.
So I think kind of take a step back, be like, okay, do we have time for this in our ongoing one-on-one? I
Hmm.
do think dedicated time is great, and coming with again that really clear like almost agenda typed out of like
Hmm.
again, I like to structure it as like these are my interests, these are my strengths, like this is what I want to work on, and this is my long-term view. Like next year I want to be promoted, next 3 years I want to, next 2 years I want an intern, next 3 years I want to be a manager, whatever it is. Does this timeline look realistic? How can we work together to make sure I get there?
Yeah.
I think when it is sometimes that longer agenda, separate meetings probably the way to go. But I think general checkups for feedback, things like that, can live in your routine one-on-ones as
Yeah.
well.
You're product managing your career, which I've heard
Yeah,
a term thrown around, and this is good to see. Like you practically are doing it. You're setting up docs, sort of writing guidelines, and then sharing with stakeholders and getting feedback. Like you're taking ownership of it.
100%. I think I don't remember the book, but I know that this concept in general is also thrown around really heavily, but
Mhm.
it's a concept of like managing up where you want to be easy to manage. You want it to be
Right.
very straightforward if you are going to get promoted or not. Like you want it to be very very obvious. It shouldn't be
Right.
like, let's think about it. Should I advocate for
Mm,
this person? You want to make it as easy as possible for them to be like, no discussion needed. Obviously, this person's going to get a promo. Like
I
simple.
love that.
Yeah.
Um, and since we're on that topic, before I go into the leveling guideline aspect of your third point, on the specific point of managing up, um, what are things that you can do outside of like your, one-on-one or this career conversation that can make life easier for your manager and just show to them that you're going to be a great person to work with?
I think the main thing that I try to practice day to day is not necessarily asking too many open ended questions where I'm not just going to be like, should I do this? Or, whatever it might look like. My manager also manages me and like everyone that I guess reports to him. Those individuals also have reports that report to them. So I
Hmm.
feel like, long story short, I think he's very busy. He
Yeah.
is very busy for sure. So when it comes to questions and ways that I interact with him, I try to not just be like, I don't know what to do. I try to be like, okay, not sure what to do. Here's option A, pros, cons of it. Here's option B, pros, cons of it. Because at the end of the day, again, I'm early in career. I'm not trying to make crazy decisions with like no check-ins with, senior level people before
Right.
I take action. But I think being clear of like, here are two options. Which do you think's better? Oh, you don't like any of these? Now it's a little easier for you to guide me to option C.
Yeah.
But I think that's way better than just being like very open ended, broad, like be very proactive when it comes to asking questions and also taking initiative.
Yeah.
I think, again, managers don't necessarily have all the time to like repeat things. So
Right.
be really conscious about being present in your one on ones, take notes, like listen to the feedback that they're giving, listen to what they're asking for, and then being really concise and detailed about actually responding to those things.
That's perfect. And the third part was leveling guidelines. So, every role has them out there. So, what should I do as a PM if I want to get promoted, let's say in a year? Um, should I be, creating my own doc with leveling guidelines? And if I do that, what do I actually look at and how do I manage those things?
Yeah, so I think a lot of companies, again, maybe do have an expectation kind of list of like, this is what expected of a senior, this is what expected of, early career software
Hmm.
engineering one. I think comparing the two, just being like, okay, I see this added responsibility that rather than just adding to the system, they actually own the system and all the different stakeholders or whatever it might look like. So I think organizing all of those. and then directly writing how you're going to be practicing those skills in that career chat one-on-one doc. I think that would be a very clear way to determine, like, okay, this is me showing that I'm going to be developing and working on all these skills that the next level of my role entails.
Right.
And then I think another example, just because often those kind of leveling docs tend to be a little high level, I like to also look at people that I work with that are just, again, at that level that I want to be. What
Mhm.
skills, what are they doing that I am missing or like need to grow into to get there too? Because there is, I think actually might have been Amazon that I heard some friends said this at, but
Mhm.
it's almost like you need to be acting at the level ahead,
Yeah,
almost like at least 6 months earlier than the actual promo season comes
that's
around.
right.
You need to be acting like that senior or again 2 or whatever your next level is beforehand. You need to be like already matching that and then be like, obviously, I'm doing all that work at a senior level. It's time for me to, get promoted to a 2, 3, whatever.
That's perfect. It's like going back to your point of making it very clear that it's a no-brainer you should be promoted,
Right.
because you've proven it for, let's say, 6 months, and or you're, I think it's coined as like functioning at the at the level you're looking to pursue or something like that.
Exactly.
So that's perfect. I think that is all the questions I've had, and I feel like we went through so much. We talked about, your path to product management, and then from there we went into how you've been able to get promoted multiple times over the past 2 years. So this was really helpful. Like, I learned a lot. I'm sure people who are in college and aspiring PMs are going to learn a lot as well. So thank you for taking time to talk to us. And I definitely want to plug your TikTok and social medias as well, because there's even more insightful information out there that you share. So please make sure you check those out. I'll add them in the description. And any other things that you want to call out before we call it a day?
I think that's most right. I guess ending note that just after this conversation I'm thinking heavily about is just like get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, get comfortable
Mhm.
asking uncomfortable questions, having again the uncomfortable conversation about your career. Like I think people tend to be a little avoidant and again, I am also one of those people that does that, but you need to push yourself to get anything that is worthwhile. So,
That's
yeah.
huge. I'm learning that as well. So
Yeah.
that's a great reminder. I need to make a sticky note and put it on my computer to think about every day.
Yeah.
That's really important. So thank you again. And
Thank you.
everyone, yeah, if you are following us here, thanks for joining. And make sure you like this, subscribe, give us a comment with any additional questions that we missed out on. And we'll see you next time.
All
Bye.
right, thank you.